I'm Lauren Kennedy, and together with Sarah and a third colleague of ours, Emily Ford, who's based in Detroit, we recently founded Neighborhood Villages, which is a nonprofit that will be looking at innovative ways to improve the availability of high-quality, affordable childcare. We'll be focusing first and foremost here on the city of Boston, but the idea being that hopefully if we're successful, we'll be able to build a model that you can bring to other cities. And you know, 20 years, 50 years down the line, maybe one day in the United States, we have a universal childcare program like exists in many other countries. My background is in healthcare policy. I've worked here in Massachusetts and in Washington, D.C. around how to try to make access to affordable, high-quality healthcare more universal. So some work on improving access to health insurance, as well as improving how care is delivered to better meet the needs of people and address the social determinants.
My name is Sarah Muncey. I have been a teacher. I was a teacher in Atlanta, Georgia. I taught 8th grade there. And then I moved to Boston and spent 12 years at Boston Collegiate Charter School, which is not far from here. I was a 7th grade English teacher there, an English department chair, and then the director of operations, and then finished my time there as the director of family and community relations. 80% of brain development occurs by the time a child is 3. 90% of brain development is done by the time a child is 5. 5 is when most kids in America start in our public education system. So we literally wait until 90% of brain development is done to start working with kids. So brains develop through interactions with people. So when you smile at a baby, you're not just smiling at a baby, you're literally growing their brain. They learn, when I smile, my mom or my dad or my grandmother or my caretaker or my daycare provider smiles back at me. She likes that. He likes that. And that creates a new connection in their brain. So they now are wired to know better how to relate to people. And so the way that a baby's brain develops is every time they interact with their environment, good or bad, it's creating these pathways, these synapses. And the pathways are like roads for information. So by the time a child is 3, they have the most synapses, the most connections between the different parts of their brain that they'll ever have in their whole life. A 3-year-old's brain has way more synapses. It's, when you think of it, it almost looks like a web, like tree roots. There's way more of them. It's denser at 3 than it is at 18 or at 7. That's because we start shedding them after 3. Your brain starts saying like, oh, I'm not using these ones a lot, so you start shedding them. So what that means is that everything you're gonna have to work with in your brain, you get by the time you're 3. So we need to make sure that by the time a child is 3, their brain is chock full of synapses, that they have had a lot of positive experiences, that their lives have low toxic stress and high positive experiences, that they know these basic answers to basic questions that their brains answer for them. Like, am I gonna be safe? Am I gonna be fed? Is my mom happy, or my primary caregiver? Does she cry a lot? All of those kinds of things give them messages and help actually like build the map of their brain. So yes, some brain development happens before you're born. So some part of your brain is DNA, right? Most of your brain is not. Most of how well you will do in the world, how well you will interact with other people, with your environment, whether or not you will have really good impulse control, what your fight or flight will be like. If something happens in your classroom, will you then have your heart racing for 20 minutes when the kid next to you is like, oh, there was just a loud bell? All of those things are really formed in your brain by the time you're 3. And the reason that this information moved me from the 5th through 12th grade, I was always a secondary teacher. I taught middle school. If you can teach middle school, it should be a law that you have to. Like, so few people, you have to be so weird to be good at teaching middle school that you should just have to do it. And I thought I would always be a middle school teacher. I was an 8th grade teacher, and then I became a 7th grade teacher, which is where like the real weirdos go. Like, if you can teach 7th grade, you gotta do it. This is what frustrated me. I taught at a really high-performing school, a school that looked at the whole child, that provided everything a kid might need. but it didn't start till 5th grade, and I managed our wait list. So I would call parents and say a spot opened up, a wait list of 3,000 kids. Public lottery, random lottery, and I would call families, and every once in a while a family would say, like, you know what, you're probably not gonna take my kid. She's autistic nonverbal, or he has these kinds of behavioral issues. And I would say, we are a public school, of course we will take your kid. We will do whatever, we will get to know your child, we'll get to know your family. And kids would come to our school, and either we had the infrastructure to work with the student and give them everything we needed, or we built it. But we definitely were gonna serve this child, any child, as best we could, as best anyone could. That's what we were trying to do, was give the best to every kid. And a lot of times what I saw happen with our highest needs kids, with those families whose parents said, you probably can't handle my kid, is that after a couple months, parents, we talked every day, I was always at the front door, and there was always this time where they said something amazingly wonderful, like for an autistic, nonverbal child, who after 3 months in a really, really good school could communicate with an iPad. So to have a mom say to you, I had my first conversation with my kid. This child, in 3 months at a really, really, really good school, went from not being able to communicate with the world to being able to communicate with the world. If that child had gotten what they needed from birth to 3, might they have an IP? Might they have a learning disability? Maybe, absolutely. But they would probably be talking to their mom. They would probably be in science class instead of in like a pull-out remediation for how to use that iPad. And so I just kept thinking, like, gotta get in sooner. And it turned out that sooner was literally at birth. These interactions that I was talking about that build a child's brain, it's not just what you show your kid. There are times when you like cry in the bathroom and then you're fine for your kid. Right? There's something going on in your life and you do not let your child see that. You do the very best you can, and you kind of feel like they're okay because they didn't see me cry. Well, it turns out that while it is better for the child not to see you upset a lot, not to hear a lot of yelling, it's better for a child to know that their home is a stable, happy place. It turns out that your cortisol level, your stress hormone, whoever the primary caregiver is in a child's life, there are studies over the entire course of a child's adolescence, so from birth to 13, where everyone in a family spit into a tube every night so that their spit could be tested for cortisol, for stress hormone. And from birth to about 13, no matter what the primary caregiver is doing to make her home feel stable, her cortisol levels were the same as her baby's. But as stressed as you are, that is how stressed your child is. And what cortisol does to a child, it's that fight or flight hormone. Cortisol is going to regulate things later in your life, like your weight and your blood pressure and all of those things. But also it's going to regulate how easy is it for you to sit in your desk and intake information in a traditional classroom setting. All of those kinds of things, how do you relate to your peers, how do you relate to your teachers, are really determined by many factors, but one of them is cortisol. So it's very important that families with young children in them can take time for that parent, for her or his own mental health, physical health, and just kind of spiritual well-being, being able to process what's going on in your life. Even though that is the most critical time, and every society in the history of world shows us that they knew this. So when you look at starting with like primitive man, before we were even like this exact species, that people lived in some kind of village setting, that there was some kind of community around people who had a young baby. When someone has a baby, what do? You like cook for them, right? Or you go, I try and like clean their car. I feel like that's a nice thing to do for someone who just had a baby. You try and do things to take things off their plate because we acknowledge as a society, this is a stressful time. You're not sleeping that much. Breastfeeding is hard. Any kind of feeding is hard. Your other kids might be freaking out because you had a baby. You probably don't have maternity or paternity leave because we live in America. So you're stressed out about money. You're stressed out about all these things. So what we do in America is we take this time where we know a child's brain is going to develop according to how stressed his or her primary caregiver is, and we make it as stressful as we possibly can. And then to add on to that, we make childcare, we make going back to work, we make looking for a job incredibly expensive. We directly correlated also to how much access they had to quality early education. And when I say early education, I mean very early education. I don't mean Head Start. Head Start, usually, there's early Head Start in some places. It's hard to access, as it sounds like you've experienced. But there are some early Head Start programs. They're few and far between. For the most part, Head Start, which is also hard to get into, starts at 2.9, which is this arbitrary number that was designed because that's when most kids are potty trained, is at 2.9. And so that's when we start caring about kids' brains in America. But what we know is that that is exactly the moment that the window is closing. But if we can get to a child's brain, I mean, if you just think of it as, obviously we're thinking about kids as whole people, but if you think about just their brain and their brain development, there are things going on in a child's brain from birth to 3, where if addressed then, they might be fixed. I don't want to say fixed because it's not like there's something wrong, but that's why early intervention programs are so powerful, because maybe a child isn't rolling over, or they're not crawling, or they're not walking. That indicates other developmental delays that might be going on that can literally just be mitigated. They can just be fixed because that child is still in that early stage of brain development where 80 to 90% of their brain is developing. Instead, we wait until 3. We wait until it's much, much harder to even attempt to start caring. And usually we wait until 5 when it's possible to make big gains, but not like if you got in there when the child was born. Being in a really, really, really high quality childcare setting, and one that's not stressing your parents out too, right? One that has the hours your parents need, that they can afford, is close to your home, is easy to get to, is open on snow days. All of these kinds of things that might make a parent stress and therefore have a negative effect on their child's development. 40-year, 50-year studies that of kids who were in really, really high quality early childhood centers versus kids who weren't. And what we see is that adults, when they're adults, people who attended great childcare centers as kids have higher rates of high school graduation. They complete more school, whether that's high school, college, master's degree. They have a much lower likelihood to have drug dependence. They have much lower healthcare spending and higher incomes. So their families are generally doing better because they are just bringing in more money for the same amount of work, and much lower rates of unemployment. So all of these factors in adults, I'm not talking about the parents, these things actually also apply to parents of kids who are in really great early childhood, but all of these things are better if you give a kid a really good birth to 3, birth to 4, birth to 5 education. What's not up there is there's also some research that shows, it's pretty clear that there are also lower rates of incarceration. So what we do in America is we spend all of our money here, post-school, right? Either here, during school, or post-school. This is the return on investment. So how much money do you save society, whether it's from healthcare spending, incarceration rates, special ed that may or may not be necessary if a kid had gotten what they needed. And it's a clear curve. So this is the return on investment for really good prenatal care. And then here's what we're talking about, programs targeted towards the earliest years. These programs, accessible, high quality, affordable, birth to 3 childcare, every dollar you spend here saves society, whether it's your city, your town, your state, $13 down the line in all of the services that you are not going to need, whether it's unemployment or special ed or all of those things that I've been talking about. What quality means, because it's not just like a good school, this like amorphous thing, does your kid go to a good school? We can really measure this. For early childhood, for birth to 3, birth to 5 programs, it means having really highly skilled teachers who know a lot about brain development and social and emotional development in the children they're serving. It means small class sizes with high adult to children ratios. And the ratios that the state mandates feel like they're already really tough to meet. So for an infant, it's 1 to 3, 1 adult for every 3 infants. That's hard. 1 adult all day with 3 infants. So even these ratios that seem really ambitious when you look at how much you're paying people and how big our staff is, etc., they really need to be higher. So for the next age group up, it's like 2 to 7. That's really hard. 2 adults with 7 14-month-olds. That's like intensely stressful. So we really need more staff in every room. We need really safe physical environments. We need kids to be able to feel confident enough to explore the world around them without feeling like everything is a danger. We need age-appropriate and cognitively appropriate curriculum. So again, teachers who understand where you are in your judgment and can help you move along in that spectrum. A very language-rich environment. So words everywhere, talking everywhere. One of the things that you want to look for if you're looking for a quality place for your infant to spend their day is, are the teachers babbling sort of, you almost sound like an idiot. You're like babbling to a baby. You should babble to newborns. You should talk all the time to newborns. That's how many words they're gonna have later in life. That's how good they're gonna be at talking, at expressing themselves, at interacting with the world. So you're really looking for adults who are going to talk incessantly to babies who cannot talk back. A really high and consistent level of parent involvement, making it really easy for parents to be involved in their child's care. Making pickup and drop off a time when parents can really talk to kids' teachers and understand how their day was. And also providing parents with an opportunity to learn about brain development, to not have it all be instant. Like sometimes you didn't get exactly what we're talking here when you were a baby. So you might, and I mean, who remembers when they're a baby? So you don't really know. So we all need to study and be teachers to our kids. We're looking for warm schools, inclusive schools, where there's a lot of warm interactions between kids and adults, where the adults in the room are clearly delighted with the children in the room, where there's a lot of laughter and smiling and talking and snuggling and cuddling, where there's babies being rocked in comfy chairs and nice cribs. You want it to not feel like industrial. So I mentioned before that every $1 spent on high quality early childhood will give a $13 return on investment. This is better when people talk about like investing in Facebook or Amazon or all these companies that are doing so well, and people talk about, oh, you should buy their stock. This is better than any investment you could make on Wall Street. This is a higher return on investment. If an investment banker heard about a stock or a mutual fund or any kind of investment they could make that had a 13% return on investment, they would buy it. They would be pushing each other out of the way to buy it because that's such a great return on investment. So we know that birth to 5 has the higher returns than preschool alone. If you start in preschool, you're going to see a change in your child if you can. And this is not to say that they have to be in a high quality daycare center. There are a lot of family daycare centers that are high quality, and whoever you have your child home with, who you may not even be paying, whether it's a family member, you can have a high quality environment at home. This is not to say that all kids have to go to a center. If the first time a child is in a really stimulating high quality environment is when they're 3, you're gonna see some immediate gains. So you're gonna see some really good stuff happen when it comes to their cognition, their language, all of the developmental signs when they're 3. There's some evidence that there's fade out when you start there, that you'll see it while they're in those programs, but that doesn't mean if when they go to kindergarten, they're at a school that's not great, that you're gonna keep seeing those gains. Whereas with birth to 3, you will. What happens in birth to 3 shapes your brain. It's going to change your educational outcomes for the rest of your life. We know that quality programs are comprehensive. So that means that they have nutrition as part of them. They have parent involvement as part of them. They have access to resources as part of them. So if a parent is struggling with finding fair, affordable housing that is safe and meets the needs of her child who has asthma and therefore can't live in a place that has black mold growing on the ceiling, not that anyone should, but if you see that changing the dynamic of a family, if you see that mom missing work because her child had an asthma attack, had to go to the ER, couldn't go to school the next day, she's missing work, she's losing her job. These are the kinds of things that high quality programs help with. They say, your landlord can't have you in a home with black mold, and this is what we're gonna do about it. So those are the kinds of programs that we're talking about. What we see also is that, and again, I'm using moms, but it's really the primary caregiver. For a lot of our data, that's the mom. So we see that moms who have access to quality care have better jobs. They don't have to leave the workforce for as long. They're not as stressed out at work. They're more likely to take on challenges at work. They're more likely to apply for a promotion because they're not thinking, if I apply for that promotion, I'm probably, even if I got it, how hard is it going to be for me to change my hours at daycare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to take that promotion. So women who have access to really good birth to 3 childcare are going to be higher in their careers, earning more in their careers for the trajectory of their whole career. So for the next year, that might be a couple dollars an hour, it might be $5,000 a year, it might be sort of like a bump in their salary. By the time you look down 20 years down the line, getting on that other track is going to be a huge difference for that woman. And so we see that women who have access to childcare have better outcomes there. And the really kind of great news about all of this is that the research exists, the evidence exists, other countries are doing it really well. We're not figuring this out from scratch. So it's sort of ready to be implemented right away. Despite everything we've talked about, the US is one of only 3 countries in the world that offers no paid maternity leave. 3 in the world. It's us, Papua New Guinea, and Oman. Those are the countries that have none. Some of them have only a little, we have none. And we know that that time when you first have a baby, or when you first adopt a baby, or when you are fostering to adopt a baby, that bonding time, that's when a lot of that brain development, a lot of those synapses, a lot of those connections are happening. You have to have time to bond with a baby. It can't be a luxury. It's a biological necessity. It's how we were made. We obviously don't have universal childcare, and beyond that, we don't really start investing in our children's brains and social and emotional well-beings and education until they're 5. We've tried twice in America to implement universal childcare. The first time was during World War II, when all the men went off to war, and we still needed to make things. We still needed to manufacture things. We needed to keep the country going. So the Lanham Act was passed, and this opened childcare centers. The term daycare, this was a brand new term. The thought that you would take a child out of their home and have them in daycare. They opened daycare centers in almost every state. They were federally funded. The funding included food, staff training, and the building of the buildings themselves. And they were great, and women loved them. And not every woman wants to be home with her kids. It's not a choice that every single woman would make. You will choose it at the very beginning, but we shouldn't assume that, like I like working, like I liked going back to work after a couple months. And so this was the first time that women were like, oh, this is kind of nice, and kind of got a taste of really being in the workforce. And they were really championed by Eleanor Roosevelt. And when the war ended, the funding was gone because it was considered this emergency wartime measure. So I have a quote from her there that says, "Many thought they, the centers, were purely a war emergency measure. A few of us had an inkling that perhaps they were a need which was constantly with us, but one that we had neglected to face in the past." The next time was in 1971. It was the Comprehensive Child Development Bill. It was passed by both houses of Congress. It was passed in a what now seems completely impossible bipartisan way. So incredible bipartisan support. Nixon actually talked about it all the time on the campaign trail. We're going to do this. All the other industrialized countries were starting to do it. It was going to be a huge program. It was going to provide sliding scale, universal childcare that everyone was going to have access to. You didn't have to use it, but you could if you wanted to. And it seemed like a sure thing. From the time that it was passed by both houses of Congress to when it landed on Nixon's desk, there was a huge misinformation campaign kind of grounded in the Cold War, saying this is communism, this is taking children away from their parents, this is changing the fabric of families and taking women away from their children so that they can indoctrinate you. They went as far as to put flyers on people's doors all over the South that said, because basically what the act said is that every child had a right to high quality childcare, and so they were saying that if your baby now has rights, then do they have religious freedom? Can they tell you when they're 3, I don't want to be a Christian, and you have to let them? I mean, crazy stuff. And so by the time it got on Nixon's desk, it was vetoed. So what we have today is a patchwork of child care centers, family daycare providers, workplace-based centers, and family care, and it is incredibly expensive. In Massachusetts, the average yearly cost of full-time infant care is $17,062. That's $14.22 a month. That if you work full-time at minimum wage, you just about, after taxes, are going to be taking home enough to put your child in care without food or rent or health care or anything else. Infant care in our state costs $6,360 more per year than in-state tuition for college. Based on average incomes, an average income, and these numbers, that means a family has to spend about 20% of their total family income a year on the care of one infant. Massachusetts is the most expensive state for childcare in America. The next is New York. They kind of go back and forth, but right now I think we're number one. And of the 11,000 accredited daycare centers in the US, most accredited is really high quality. Most have a waiting list of 1 year or more. One of the things really standing in the way to quality childcare in the US is that childcare workers in America are really underpaid and undervalued. So in Boston, within the city of Boston, one adult raising one child, a living wage for that unit of 2 people is $57,000. Most child care workers in Boston make an average of $31,000. That's without any benefits. That means that they can't afford to live in the neighborhoods where they work. That means that they're traveling an hour to work on public transportation. That means that they can't afford child care for their own children. That means that they are in substandard housing, that they don't have access to quality food. So we're taking people who are making very little money, giving them a lot of stressors in their lives, and then saying, here, spend 10 hours with children intensely cultivating their brains. And then they don't drive their own professional development, they don't receive the kind of coaching that teachers get, they're not treated as teachers. Child care centers in America are really grossly inspected. So in some places like Massachusetts, there's a lot of regulations. You have to follow regulations, you have to prove them. But in a lot of states, graveyards get inspected more than most family daycare centers. So you might be paying a ton for a family daycare center where your child is not safe.
I will talk a little bit about one of the bright spots that we do have in the United States. And I'm also going to talk about it because when you hear about our vision, hopefully sort of hearing some of the setup here will make our vision sound a little bit less outlandish and crazy. One of the bright spots in the United States is that the military, our armed services, sort of across the armed services, Army, Navy, Air Force, etc., has really invested in a systematized approach to childcare. And it was in 1989 that Congress passed the Military Child Care Act. Child care centers were in pretty poor shape, and there was sort of enough outrage about the situation, right? Saying you have families who are potentially giving the ultimate sacrifice for this country should be able to be rest assured that their kids are in good hands if they're overseas serving, right? Or if the family, which is serving as a family, is living on base. What it did was improve availability. So it put a ton of federal resources behind building child care centers and also improving the number of family daycare providers on military bases as well. And to put it in perspective, what the act said was that at a minimum level, US tax dollars, federal spending had to match a minimum of 50% of operating costs for these child care centers. So they passed the Military Child Care Act, and they really turned around in something like 5 years. I mean, quickly, the whole sort of system of child care across military bases. The act also improved quality. So it set up requirements around the quality accreditation that these child care centers or family daycare centers had to have. And it improved quality also because it valued the ability to recruit and retain really high quality teachers, right? So what do we know in education? That at the end of the day, it's about a really solid, strong foundation of fantastic teachers, right? So they required a pay increase for the child care providers. helping to kind of recruit talent and retain talent. And then that also required that there be independent accreditation of these centers. It ensured affordability by setting uniform tuition fees that are based on a sliding scale model that are based on a family's income. So it set, and so you can sort of see it here, the amount that you pay for your child's care is based on your income. And the other really important and unique factor is that how much you pay is only based on your income and the number of children that you have in care. In the civilian world, the world that probably most of us live in, if not all of us, you often pay much more for the cost of an infant. On one of Sarah's slides, I think she sort of demonstrated that the amount that you pay in tuition for your 6-month-old is often much higher than what you'll end up paying for your 2 or 3-year-old. Often because, again, those ratio levels, you need more staff to care for the youngest children, less staff to care for a room of preschoolers. But the military said it's not going to work if our youngest families, who may be or are likely to be the families with the lowest income, because they're sort of just getting started in their careers, are paying the most because they have the youngest children. So you're not sort of caught in this sort of trap of, I need care when my child is 6 months old, a year old, but I can't afford it until they're 2 or 3 years old. You can get your child enrolled in a child care center or a family daycare center and not be worried about the cost across the sort of age range. A family making below $31,000 a year could be paying as little as $59 a week to send one child to school, which comes out to about $12 a day. They've really proved that you can do universal childcare in a way that you make quality, affordable childcare available to all families by putting a lot of resources behind it. And you could send your child there and not be stressed out that it was taking 20%, 40% all of what you may be bringing in as income. We can improve availability. We can improve affordability, that we know a sliding scale tuition model works. It won't cover all of your operating costs, but if you can get offsets from federal government, state government, as we sort of start our initiative, we'll be relying on philanthropy. You can keep a system sustainable, and you can also keep a sustainable level of governmental interest in it. The federal government has done study after study the last 20, 30 years on this program to keep asking itself, is it worth investing how much money we are investing in childcare? And the answer comes back, it's expensive, but yes. The military requires a lot of accreditation and they do a lot of kind of inspection, and as a result, 96% of their centers are accredited. In Massachusetts, there's actually a great story in the Boston Globe saying that the cost of childcare, of running these childcare centers, has become so high that many great organizations aren't able to accept vouchers anymore because the kind of government allocation for that voucher doesn't cover the actual cost of caring for that child. So you have organizations and even nonprofits saying, we want to be reserving a certain number of seats for families who are using vouchers to access childcare, but we can't because we can't meet the bottom line and it would cause us to have to close our doors. So you're seeing actually kind of reduced availability of childcare centers that offer voucher kind of reserved seats. So how that's different from this system is this system basically says, we don't need vouchers anymore because you'll just come to us and tell us what your income is, and we'll tell you what the tuition is based on whatever income you're making. Is, you can see on the slide there, that can be anything from $0 to $30,000. Who we are, we're calling ourselves neighborhood villages. We're really hoping to workshop it with the communities that we hope to, one day be able to be a part of, and say to those communities, if you can build it with us from the ground up, what do you think that it should include? What does it need to include? And what would be on the wish list? We're sort of taking off the table any of the monetary restrictions for now and said, let's just kind of put together the wish list and build sort of the best product that we can. So this chart here sort of gives an overview of if you said,
you know, what is a neighborhood village school? What are its characteristics? What is it defined by? We sort of identified these kind of 4 key pillars: high quality care and curriculum. So some of the things we've talked about, we want to make sure that they're all accredited, so they are all high quality, safe centers, that they are offering curriculums that are informed by brain science, by trauma, by the best and brightest minds that, aren't we lucky, many of them seem to live right here in Boston and can help us build this. That we are not just recruiting and retaining really kind of quality teachers, but that we are investing in our teachers and treating them like the professionals that they are and the incredibly valued teachers that they are, as Sarah talked about, right? This period in a child's development being so critical. So that would include a commitment to fair pay. It would include a commitment to professional development. This is also something the military does well, where they'll pay for the professional development and encourage the setting aside of time and the working towards becoming a master teacher. Maybe having a computer lab where you can take online courses to work your way up and continue to kind of refine your expertise in this space. And then building strategic partnerships with leaders in brain science, early childhood education and development. Again, we're lucky to be here in Massachusetts, where we have so many phenomenal, not just academic centers, but existing daycare centers, like the Nursery Learning Lab is doing really exciting work. We hope to be able to learn from them. Great programs like Sarah mentioned, First Teacher or Boston Basics, who are all really looking at this period and learning from them and seeing what of their programs can we take and implement in our space to try to make sure that we're really building a culture of practice and an example of how you could really systematize this. And then also empowering the family, the caregiver, and saying, if you're interested in how you can take some of what your kids are learning in our classrooms home, we'll offer, kind of parent empowerment classes, parent coaching classes, creating handbooks that parents can take home and practice with their children. The second pillar being affordability, so what we were talking about before, utilizing a sliding scale tuition model where it's tied to the number of children and not their age to ensure that this care is available to all families because it is affordable to all families. Third, that we're family friendly. And this is something that I think many people kind of quickly and viscerally react to, that it's a common shared experience that even if you are able to get your child into a daycare program, and if you're able to get them into a high quality program, often the operating hours of those programs don't align with like your lived reality of how you might go about working in your own life. And that could be whether you're working a couple jobs, if you're working a shift-based job, you don't always have control over the hours, right, that you're working. Or you could be a partner in a law firm, right, and say my day doesn't end at 4:30 to pick up my child at 5 p.m. on the dot or pay a late fee. And that's also where you see, not just in terms of cost, but because of the structure of most daycare centers, a lot of caregivers, most often women, dropping out of the workforce because the daycare system that we have just doesn't match the demands on you in the workplace. So when we say we're family friendly, we want an operating schedule that meets the needs of families. So that's open early in the morning, 6:30, 7 o'clock a.m., and is open late on the back end, 7 p.m., 8 p.m., not just allowing, to make sure that you can have your child in care when you need it to go to work, but also to allow you to access some of the wraparound services that I'll talk about in a second, so that if you've been finding it, if any of you have this experience, I have a 1.5-year-old at home. How many doctor's appointments I've canceled just because it's either not going to work or it's not worth it to bring her there with me, right? And that's not taking good care of myself when I need to be making sure that I'm caring for the health of the whole family, right? So our operating schedule, that's both in terms of daily hours, and it's also our calendar, making sure that we are open, have options during snow days, during summer vacation, because people don't stop working just because it's a snow day or because the rest of school has let out. We'd all love, I think, to have 3 months of a summer where we didn't have to go to work but still got paid, but that's not the lived reality. So how do we make sure that our operating schedule, again, really meets the needs of the families that are a part of our school? And then lastly, location, to make sure that we're located in a convenient place for the community that we're serving. And then lastly, that we serve the whole family, that we're recognizing, as Sarah said, right, that yes, the child, right, is sort of the center of the care that we're providing, but we need to be supporting the entire family, right, and that's an inclusive definition of family. It's parents, it's other caregivers, right, so other extended family that probably many of us rely on to help us with raising children, and it's also siblings. So as we think about this, some of the, and this isn't a comprehensive list, this is sort of just a high level, that these wraparound services would include access to primary care. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of how we're hoping to partner with community health centers to make this a possibility, but that we would be located either within or right next to a community health center, so that if you dropped your child off at 6:30 in the morning, you could maybe see your primary care doctor at 6:45 or 7 and be on your way to work. Or similarly, do it at 2 p.m., do it at 4 p.m., do it at 7 p.m. to ensure that the whole family is being able to access the services that they need. And then siblings, so making sure that it's not just your child who's enrolled in school with us, but also maybe your 6-year-old who's been let out for summer vacation, that we can act as a referral point to make sure that there's sibling care. Or if there's a snow day and Boston Public Schools is closed, how can we help families figure out what to do with the sibling who may not be in our childcare program, so that mom or dad don't have to stress about whether that means they're going to miss a day of work. And then lastly, under the sort of heading of just how to kind of sustain household stability, right? How we keep the wheels on the bus, as I say, when we had our daughter, the wheels all came off the bus and you just had to figure out how to rebuild it. That we are able to offer access to legal services, kind of financial or employment help, as I mentioned, kind of immigration status consultation, access to folks who can help with affordable housing, and then food and nutrition.
One of the things that I think about is, like, as you're thinking about, like, educators or whoever is involved in the teaching, what does it look like to nurture the assets that are in the community? So what does it look like to build pipelines or pathways for community members to be a part of the different schools that exist? So that was one thing that just came to mind, like, as that what the presentation is, really being explicit about honoring communities.
We hope to have really active kind of parent boards, if you will, to make sure that it's not just a kind of beginning workshop, but an ongoing communication with the families and the communities we're serving, to make sure that we're kind of continuously making sure that we're not just dropping in, parachuting in a program assuming that we know what we're talking about, but really working in partnership.
Two things that I think of, thank you for sharing that, is thinking how easy it can be to just slip away from that path of, like, it becomes, with gentrification happening in communities, how easy it can be, like, it's less expensive to hire somebody from outside the community.
Right.
And so when you talk about, like, the name of the organization being like a village, what does it look like when the people who are taking care of your children actually live in the community, and really uplift that idea of what a village's responsibility looks like?
I would tell you that the one thing that I think is critical for you to expand your base beyond the health centers, because truthfully, I mean, a lot of community organizations don't have real good working relationships with the health centers, and this is a community thing. But the one thing that the city of Boston does have, particularly the Black community, it has a very distinguished history of activism on the issue of public education. And the dilemma is, well, our good working class leaders don't listen to what these people have to say. But, the busing crisis came about because of parents, because of concerned parents and concerned educators fighting to make sure that children got quality education. I think that we would love to, I'm speaking for my friend Don Bivens here, but I think we could, or Janice McManus, but I think we can bring some folks together. I think, having their support and having their voice is going to be critical. Probably even, I wager, more important than having the support of the health center. Because, they'll fight it. I mean, if they don't feel as if they're included, that becomes a dilemma.
No, I was thinking about a few different things. What's happening across America is that the affordability of housing in the city has decreased because of gentrification. So a lot of people aren't going to be where they are, who knows for how long. The neighborhoods here, Roxbury, Dorchester, kind of Mattapan, most of the family income for singles or people is less than $35,000. Chances are 5 or 6 years, if you don't have a voucher, you're not going to be living in these neighborhoods. So if we don't build housing that's truly affordable, it's not going to be used to have these in the city because these people won't be living in the city. There are people being pushed to Springfield, they're now in Mendon Upton, they're in Fall River. I don't have the statistics, but if you do have a voucher and you can't do it in the city of Boston, you're out of the city of Boston. And that's been planned and it's been going on for a while. So that's just something to keep in mind. If we don't increase the stock of truly affordable public housing, a lot of things aren't going to happen. So I think Boston is a city, a lot of things happened here. They never planned for these many people to be here, to live here, and for all these things to happen here. I mentioned the part about a lot of income inequality. So different neighborhoods have different affordability rates. Like the Back Bay South End, you're poor if you make $80,000 a year. Well, right now I don't know any people that do make that. So depending on where you're located, it's going to be a whole different thing. Plus you have the federal sort of low income, and you have the state or whatever. I think it would be very innovative in terms of a village that you include everything, not just the daycare, but you have housing. Boston, we're pretty lucky because every teaching hospital is a teaching hospital, so people get really great care here compared to some other places in the country. And I had a bad experience in the emergency room in Newark, New Jersey. It's so different. A program that my family participated in when my sister was younger, there's probably some literature in, I don't know, the teachers are still at Leslie College, was a program called Follow Through, in which the mothers were in public housing or poor learned to become teachers while their children were in daycare. So it's a cultural continuation because they get a chance to go to school, it was paid for, their children get care, and so that would be an innovation that could maybe resurrected. And yeah, so it gives the parent educational experience, they gain their college credits, and they can do whatever they want to do with them. So there's a few ideas for that.
Thank you. And then lady behind here. So remind me of your name.
I'm Teresa. So my question was more so around the teachers, but then you say that someone is going to be watching children from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m.
No, it's a shift system. If they're working a 9-hour day, say, that day will include their hour for lunch. So we're not saying 10 hours with an hour for lunch. And we say an hour for their break, we're looking at innovating in the actual design of our centers by having really cool break rooms that include bunk beds. When you are with a child, a lot of children, that many hours a day, like, you have to sleep. And what you see in daycare centers is when people have their 30-minute break, they are finding a corner to like pass out in. So just like doctors who are on call overnight, or not on call, but are working overnight, have beds. There, we want to have beds there. So we're looking at ways that our teachers can work out during their break or after if they want to, right on site, sleep, and also have access to all of the wraparound services that we're talking about for families.
This just got me wondering about like possibly having one of your centers in like a high school, like a vocational school, where like, I guess, teachers, if they choose to, can have like their own children at that center, or even just having like apprentice teachers who are interested in early childhood education. They can also learn while going to school and taking classes. So it's just
great. Thank you.
I was just going to respond to that question. A lot of the high schools have that kind of program, so when the students graduate, they have their early childhood certificate. So if you could work in that vocational tech component, that would be a good idea. You could probably get some state funding for that. But
the term bioidentification is almost like targeting a specific group of people and by design displacing them. And in Canada, it's been shown that a group of single Native American mothers are the ones being targeted. And in these programs that they give them are more like learn how to do X, Y, and Z, but won't actually help them gain gainful employment. I was wondering if that's something your program will address, like instead of providing, I don't know, X, Y, and Z that won't give them the skill set that they need for single mothers or, you know, I don't know, people who can't get employment because of X, Y, and Z. I was wondering if that's something that you guys will address in this model in the coming years, or?
I'd like to say that we're like targeting gentrifying neighborhoods, but every neighborhood in Boston right now is under like incredibly rapid, people are being displaced incredibly rapidly. And so one of the goals that we will have at our center, and one of the data points that we're gonna track, we're thinking a lot about what data we're looking for, like what are the outcomes we're looking for, and one of them is, did we help families stay where they live if they want to? So if someone doesn't like where they live and they want to move, and that's one of their goals, we can try and help them do that. But assuming that most people would like to stay where they live and their neighborhood, can we build and work with the neighborhood development corporations, work with community groups to figure out how you do that? So
one of the things that we're concerned about in the community is we try to bring new people in. It's about now more than ever, this whole issue of democracy is important. This whole issue of community involvement and civic engagement is important. So is there, you know, you're going to be teaching people how to get jobs, you're going to be teaching people how to work computers. Anywhere in your thinking, is there any segue in your thinking that allows for about citizenship, about civic participation, about community involvement? Is that congruent with that?
Ideally, yes, and that could be anything from kind of more formalized, you know, kind of opportunities, discussions that are exactly like this, right? How do you bring people into a room, and whether the topic is the school and what could the school do to be improving, to something a little kind of broader. Yes, but I think, what was I going to say? I forgot. Oh, an informal piece of it, being that given kind of the unique features of Boston, right, and how you can have a neighborhood like the South End that has some of the wealthiest people in the city living there, and some of, you know, the most underserved communities. And they may never interact, right? Even though they live right next door to each other. If you could create a childcare center that attracted and served equally, right, both communities, is there opportunity just really informally to say at drop off, we have some couches and some muffins every morning. Do you maybe have a conversation with somebody because, you know, you have your child and all of a sudden you have something in common. You have, right, I mean, you have your first baby and you might, one person versus the other might have more money to throw at the problem, but you have the same problem, right? Whether it's your baby's not sleeping or it's hard to figure out feeding, is sort of an informal opportunity that if you create that space, can you start kind of a level of community building that should be happening and maybe isn't.
One thing that I wanted to add is, like, as you guys are thinking about this process, is not to leave the youth behind. So our young parents who are still trying to pursue their education, a way so that they don't have to drop out of school and get a job to take care of their children, having access, whether it is on site, like you were saying at Madison Park, or a vocational school, or some sort of scale for students, just making sure that that access is there for them too.
And that's one place where, depending on what networks we can tap into in Boston, like that's free. You know, like it wouldn't be a scale. At the school where I was administrator, like when we had a student who was pregnant, like one of my jobs was to advocate to get them free childcare. But I think one of the things that might be really cool is that, like, what if you came right to the center after school, maybe saw your baby, maybe got to nurse your baby, and then got to like go into our parent room and like do your homework and like holler to the office manager if you have a question with your homework, like really creating that kind of space where we're saying, because we want your child to succeed, we need you to succeed, or everything we're doing is pointless.
So one of the things that I've looked at, both, I'm on the Center for Innovative Teaching at the university, and the work I do with Boston Public Schools is, how do we serve the whole student? How do we teach to the whole student? And one of the things, the connections I keep on trying to build between the schools and the students is, what's traumatic things have happened in that particular community that those students are coming into our care or our classrooms, and they don't really even care if 5 + 4 is 9, because right now they're trying to deal with the trauma that happened in the community. So how do the staff and how do the teachers know what the community environment is, trauma environment is for any particular person coming in?
We think of trauma as an event with like maybe PTSD. That's like how people talk about trauma. But for kids growing up in America in neighborhoods where there is a lot of trauma, wherever they're looking, the trauma is constant. And so if you have an event, and then there's all of the things that happen to you biologically and psychologically because of the event, and you can talk about the kid and work through the event. But when the trauma is ongoing, and when it is environmental, maybe not even in your own home, but where you're walking to and from school. So they are like just incredible. Even trauma-informed architecture, even how you build your centers for children who are experiencing trauma. So that's something that we're actually one of the first things that we started thinking about when we baked up this idea. And it keeps coming up again and again and again, and in every way for parents, for kids. So it's definitely on our minds.
So one thought that that came up is thinking like the idea of like the neighborhood village, and thinking about how like historically Boston has been like a really segregated and like racist city. And so thinking about the idea of like a neighborhood school, like early childcare, and what that might bring up for folks when you think about like branding and reintroducing this to folks, and how that could potentially like build some resistance. So when it comes to like the busing and everything that got built in order to provide equal access for education for students of color. And so some of the things that got built out of that was like Metco, or not having neighborhood schools, we're having kids coming from all over the city to integrate schools because there wasn't equal access in neighborhoods. And so the idea of the early child care is to, again, put people back into neighborhoods, the potential for resistance around, am I going to be afforded equal access to care?